Hi everyone. Hello. It's not as busy as it was before. Anyway, there you go. I'm Dave Ranyard, and I'm going to talk about a lot of the stuff we did innovating in VR that we'd learned from previous games that we'd made, which were quite non-traditional games, which I think helped. So I've been at PlayStation for 17 years. The last sort of 3.5 years, I was running a London studio, which probably most well known for making a VR experience called the London Heist. And we actually pivoted to VR about 3.5 years ago, which at the time was quite risky. Nobody was really bothered about it, and even a couple of years ago at GDC, I was telling people I was doing VR, and they were saying, "Why are you doing that?" But it's kind of super hot now. I left PlayStation at the beginning of this year to start my own studio, which I'm in the process of doing in London. I'm going to start by showing a video, which I have shown a couple of times before, and this is 2 years old now, but this was really the moment that I realised that VR could have a really broad appeal and could mean something to a lot of people, perhaps more than gamers and things like that. So sit back and enjoy this. It's only like a minute.
Okay, here we go. Going down. Next stop, basement level. Hey, I'm thinking of something big down there with you. You see anything?
No! Ah! Oh no! Oh God, it's going to take that lamp.
Listen, have you ever done a set? Just...
Oh my God! Oh my God! Okay.
I want to show.
Oh.
Let me,
It's scary.
controller. How did you find that?
Scary. Woo! My heart's beating. Woo! When it suddenly comes, and actually your defences are taken away. That is the real.
You feel pretty vulnerable,
Scary
don't you?
bit.
Okay, so if you haven't worked it out, that's my mum. She's come through the therapy really well. But I know my mum really well, right? And so there's a few things there. I've made a lot of games. She's never rung me up before that and said, "Can I have a go at that?" But we announced like the PlayStation VR stuff 2 years ago at GDC, and my mum obviously saw some of it, and she genuinely wanted to have a go. And so it made me realise, you know, it's got an appeal beyond just gamers, right? And then that experience with her doing it was a very social experience. You know, my son was in the background doing the Jaws music, and he was desperate to have a go. So that day we had the oldest and the youngest Morpheus players. But that social experience is important because that's something, you know, people often think about VR as being this solo experience, but actually there's a lot you can do socially with it, and that's something that I'm very interested in. So there's actually been an announcement this afternoon more about PlayStation VR. But anyway, you know, under my care, we brought out these 3 experiences as different parts of the launch from the London studio. So there's the Deep that you just saw there. There's a London Heist, which is this gritty London gangster experience. And then VR Luge, where you get to lie on a giant skateboard and weave in and out of traffic. And those are lots of fun. But like I say, we actually started working in VR about 3.5 years ago. And before that, as a studio, we'd made quite a lot of non-traditional games. So I want to explain these a bit. So the first one, actually 2003, we made iToy Play, which was a camera-based game. So it's a little camera that plugged into the PlayStation 2. You could see yourself on screen and you waved at it. SingStar, which is a singing game. Dance Star, Everybody Dance in America. Dance Star Party in Europe. 2 names, 1 product. Go figure. Use a Move controller as input. And Wonderbook, Book of Spells, and we also did Book of Potions, which we did with J.K. Rowling, was an augmented reality book, again using the PlayStation camera. So here's some screenshots. So back in the day, 2002, 2003, we made iToy Play, where you were part of the game, right? And just simple motion controls, then singing into a game, you're part of the game. Everybody Dance, again, you are part of the game, right? And Wonderbook, which is the most interesting. So out of this VRDC, there are 5 talks from people who worked on Wonderbook. At the time, nobody was that bothered about it. It was like a kid's game. It was like interesting and a bit of, you know, it was cool. It was with J.K. Rowling. But actually, the things that we learned, particularly on that project, really, really helped us when we started working in VR, because it's not a traditional game and it has a number of different things. So first of all, you've got these crazy different inputs, which we're kind of getting into now. So like iToy Play used the camera. SingStar uses microphones. Downstar used the Move controller. And Wonderbook had this, it's like a marker-based book. In fact, Wonderbook used all of them. So or nearly all of them. The camera has a microphone on it as well, and there were times when you would speak in it. The Move controller was a magic wand. And so we learned a lot about having all these inputs. And those inputs are pretty similar to what we do in VR, right? So there's a camera for tracking. You can speak into it and use voice input. The Move controllers have been great for making hands in VR. And the markers on the book actually helped inform how to do the tracking for the headsets. So as a studio, we had a lot of knowledge that was very helpful when we went into the world of VR. And that's kind of one of the reasons why Sony let us pivot at that time. Because, you know, we put a big team onto VR, about 60 people, 3.5 years ago. That was like, why are you doing that? You know, but I think it paid off for us. So there's a few things that I've identified from these like older games that really helped us when we were developing for VR, and that's what I want to take you through now. So the first one is non-traditional inputs. So lots of games not using a traditional game controller. The second one is, in all these games, you don't need to navigate. And I'll talk about all these in a minute. But actually, it's quite interesting that you can make a full game without navigation, because sometimes people forget that, especially in sort of console-y, PC world. But that's something that you can do. So, you know, I think within VR, navigation isn't a must-have. And we can make some great experiences without navigation. This is a really important one. The player is part of the game. You know, so it's like Wonderbook, you're role-playing being a wizard student at Hogwarts. So if you go into a London heist, for example, you're role-playing being a gangster. And that's something that's perhaps quite different to playing a first or third-person action-adventure game. And there's a lot of social play in these games. So iToy, you know, we realised there was a penny drop moment, probably in about 2002, when we were first working with camera as input, when we realised that seeing yourself on screen was really cool, but also watching somebody else do it was really cool. Being a spectator to that, and just like my mum's video, being a spectator to her, you know, being frightened of being eaten by a shark, was a social interaction. It was part of the experience. It wasn't just a solo game, right? So I think that's a really important feature. And then this last one is kind of true of all games. You know, you want consistent and believable worlds, but I think that's probably magnified when you're in VR. So even like, again, Wonderbook, you know, we were part of this very well-regarded canon and universe of Harry Potter and Hogwarts and J.K. Rowling. So we're part of a bigger universe, that's one thing. But also in terms of how the book worked and things like that, we had to be very consistent. Again, something that I think we need to think about. So that gives us 5 areas to cover. So the different inputs, navigation is not required, players part of the game, social play, and the consistent worlds. So first of all, non-traditional inputs. So dancing. Right, I made a dancing game, which is great fun, and if you like dancing for senior executives when you're my age, you know, just saying. But if you're dancing, right, you don't want to be pressing buttons for a dancing game. You want to be dancing. And that's true in VR. If you're doing an activity, you want to be doing that activity. You don't want to be like somehow second or third removed from that by having a controller. You actually want to be doing the same physical thing. So that's why I think a London heist works really well. You've got hands, you pick up a gun, and you're actually shooting like this. You're not doing it via a controller. And that's something that's really important. So these one-to-one hand interactions are really, really valuable in VR. And I searched the internet for an image that I couldn't find. So we made this game, Book of Potions. And in that, we used the Move controller as a hand. We actually put like a wizard's glove over your hand, and we were lifting things onto the book and pouring them and things. And it's very, very similar to the hands that we have in the London heist. So all these things actually informed us a great deal about the VR work that we did later on. With hands, opening a drawer is exciting. I never thought I'd say that to so many people with a big microphone. But I remember when we were prototyping for a London heist, and the guy was saying, hey, we've got this great mechanic, you can open this drawer. And I was the studio director, I'm thinking, yeah, so we're doing a drawer opening game. But actually, when you put it in the context that you're a gangster, you're going to get shot, you've got to find a diamond, you've got to find a gun, you've got to find some bullets, it is actually pretty cool. But that's like a mind shift. You know, in a traditional game, you'd be like, draw, press a button, you know, or you might even just look at it, and then the thing automatically transfers into your itinerary or something. It's very abstract. Whereas in VR, you want it to be as real as possible, as one-to-one as possible. And that's my sort of thing. I have a little bit of a thing about this. Controllers are not one-to-one. Unless you're doing something, you can replicate. So Nick Doucet, who's done a lot of work in the Japan studio of PlayStation, and some other people do this as well, but they put the controller in VR, and then he does cool things like augmenting the controller and stuff. That's really cool, but I think it's giving you a level of abstraction. So I found this image, which is when the world was changing from horses to cars, some people were doing this, and I think that's kind of what we're doing with controllers at the moment, because game controllers have been designed to make this quite unusual system of looking at a window and pretending that's like my vision, and making it work for me to move around. And at the moment, we're taking that controller and we're trying to push it into this other medium that's actually a lot more like real life. So it sort of doesn't work. So I'm not in any way having a go at people who are doing VR with controllers. I'm just saying, I think this is going to change. You know, it feels like it's the stuff that we knew before, and we're moving into the stuff that we don't know so much about. So it's obvious to use that to start with, but I think it will change. And this is an interesting quote I found. This is from 2002, and it's about the game Alien Resurrection. Now, I don't know how many people remember this, but prior to about 2000, this is from 2000. Prior to about 2000, all first-person shooters were on PC, and they weren't on console. And everybody said, oh, they'll never work on console, because you need a mouse and keyboard to play a first-person shooter. I'm not joking, everybody said that. And if you read this quote, it just kind of summarizes it. The game's control setup is the most terrifying element. The left stick moves you forward, back, and strafes right and left, while the right analog stick turns you and can be used to look up and down. But actually, there's probably 300 million discs have been sold using that control scheme. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't quite know what the answer will be for VR, but I'm confident that with all the people that are looking at it, we'll come up with a new way of controlling navigation and controlling the game. A lot of people using hands, I think that's so cool because it's one-to-one. But it'd be interesting to see what we do to move around and things like that. Which leads me on to navigation is not necessarily required. So I've made a ton of games where you don't navigate around. It's this thing about getting from A to B, right? In early games, it's super easy to explain. You've got to get from here to over there via getting those keys, right? You don't have to localize that. It's a really obvious objective. But that doesn't mean, say, every game has to have that. And I think, you know, when you go into a VR space, it's so amazing to be transported to this other world that you don't necessarily need to have an objective like getting from A to B. I think it can be that, but I think it can be other things. And if you look at movies, how many movies are road movies? I know it's a different format, but actually, you know, probably 10 to 20% of most movies is getting from A to B. The rest is other things, exposition and finding out what's happening. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other mediums about how we can make an amazing experience without necessarily navigating. And this is another little thing I love to talk about. When did you last strafe? So strafing is doing this, not bumping into a chair. It's doing this, right? Moving left and right like this, but we don't do that in real life. We do it in video games because it's a convenient way of making this thing that's a bit weird work. And yet we're sort of trying to port that into VR experiences. Or like that quote says about the camera, you're kind of looking around like this. But we don't do that, we just do this. I mean, I know people have solved the camera really in VR, but I just think we need to think about that. We've done all these things in traditional games, and porting them directly to VR doesn't always work. It's worth looking outside that and looking at non-traditional games. So then the next bit, the player is part of the game. So, you know, if you're playing a third-person action-adventure, you're kind of controlling another character. I don't know, but I don't believe I'm that character. I think they're really cool, and I want to be them, and I want to control them, but I'm not that person. So if the player is going to be part of it, I think the first thing you need to do is start with the emotions. What's the emotional journey? I mean, that you want them to go on. This is great for game design, full stop, you know, but how do you actually want them to feel? Do you want them to feel scared? Do you want them to feel happy? Do you want them to feel elated? Do you want them to be in awe? It's actually a great starting point, rather than, oh, how am I going to get from A to B in this game? I don't know what it is yet. So I think it's a really good starting place for anybody working in VR. And then what's the story that you want them to understand, however simple or complex? My mum doing that shark thing, right? I mean, actually, you don't see it in the video. It starts out in quite a beautiful, just under the top of the sea. There's loads of fish swimming about. There's a turtle. It's really like awe-inspiring and lovely and relaxing, and then you get attacked by a shark. But the story of that is actually pretty simple. You know, it's nice, it's calm, and then you go deeper and you start to see this sunken submarine, and then out of that comes this shark, and suddenly it all changes. It's a bit moody and scary, and then you feel fear, right? It's a simple story, but nevertheless you can kind of write it down before you make it. How do you expect the player to relate to the experience? So this is Harold Lloyd, and he's hanging off a clock. And in traditional film or game, as a third person, you need to care about him, to care whether he falls off the clock or not. How many times have you seen a movie and you don't really give a flying whatever about whether the lead character lives or dies because you haven't really got any empathy with them? But this is very different in VR because it's you. You don't have to fall in love with the character. It's you. And you've got like biological responses to different stimuli around you. That is a huge toolbox for any designer. You know, you don't, like a film or a game has to set up who the character is and why you care about them and what their motive is. But actually in VR, if you feel vertigo, you feel vertigo. You don't have to worry about somebody else who's going to die. It's about you. And then social play. So all those games we made before VR were social experiences. And I can see, you know, there's like a media fear, if you like, that VR is a solo experience. All the kids are going to be strapping themselves in and we're never going to hear from them again. Sounds like a bonus, if you know my kids. But actually, sorry, being awful about them. They're lovely, really. Actually, just watching people play is a lot of fun, and you can create really engaging experiences. So you can create short-form VR experiences that you can pass and play, and you can share the experience, even though you might only have one headset. And that's something that I think is really interesting, and it's quite different to what the media perhaps are going to expect from us. You can create asynchronous play, so just having a short-form experience and a leaderboard. So when we made our VR luge game, we'd take it to different events, like the sales team would go mad for getting the fastest time and things like that. But actually, it's a very social experience. You know, even though it's turn-based, if you've got a simple leaderboard, you can easily run competitions and make it competitive in one place. You can have asymmetric play. So somebody's in a headset and somebody else could be using a phone, could be using a DualShock 4 on a PlayStation, and they're interacting in the same world. And for people who saw Katie Good's talk yesterday, she's done a load of work in this sort of social space. And they've actually turned off the main screen and just put in like a map rather than what the main player is actually seeing, so there's no spoilers. And I think that's really interesting. You know, when my mum did the shark, everyone in the room could see when the shark's attacking. And that's kind of cool because you know the kind of scare point she's going to get. But at the same time, if nobody's done it in the room, you perhaps don't want them to see that. So you can make it more asymmetric. Or maybe you can control the shark yourself from a mobile phone or something like that. Or you can be doing resource management outside the game to help the person in there. You know, they're the fighter pilot and you're doing stuff back at base, whatever. And then consistent and believable worlds. The thing I've learned the most about VR is this. Just being there is really cool. It's very different to what we're used to in movies and games. Not that they're not cool, but, you know, quite often you go straight in with the action. You know, if you look at classic Indiana Jones, as you start off in the middle of an adventure. And that's great. But what we've learned, so when we made the London heist, before we'd shown it to the world, we reviewed it back at base, and the first minute, nothing happens, right? You're just sitting there. And we as a team said, oh, is that going to be a bit boring? You know, I mean, if you think game developers, right, who takes a game to E3 or GDC and like, right, the first minute, nothing happens. So crucified by your marketing department, you know, because it's got to be a 2.5 minute turnaround or whatever. But actually, that minute is brilliant. Nobody complained about it because they get in there and it takes them a bit of time to acclimatise and just going, I wonder where I am. Oh, look. You know, it actually really works. In fact, putting people into the action is almost too much at this. I suspect it will happen in 5 years, 3 years, but right now, people aren't used to VR, so giving them that breathing space and just being there. We did a demo for Shuhei where we put him in the pub. There's like a London pub in that experience. We put him in there with an ashtray and a cigar on the table and a gun. And so after he picked up the cigar, of course, the gun wasn't a gun, it was a lighter. Lit the cigar, and he just sat there. It was actually, he's like sitting there with a Move controller doing this, but he was smoking a cigar in a London pub in VR, and that was quite a cool, and he went and told loads of people about it. But that was, you know, that just being there was cool because it's so different. Being consistent, so if you can pick up the phone, you should be able to pick up the lamp, turn it on, press some keys on the typewriter. You know, you can't get away with highlighting the one object that you can interact with. It needs to be consistent. If you can interact with things, you need to give people that flexibility. Virtual actors are really cool. So having somebody looking you in the eye, following your head as you move around, looking down on you is very, very powerful. So we made a demo where you were basically kneeling in the kind of hostage position with a VR actor with a gun to your head. That's really, really powerful. You know, it's very different. If you see that on screen, right, okay, it's quite powerful, but you can kind of walk out. You're not in any way threatened. If that's you, that is a huge difference, and that goes back to that emotional toolbox I mentioned earlier on. If you're in VR and you have no input, you kind of feel like a ghost. So I'm really interested in 360 video because I think it's very compelling in VR, whereas using video in traditional games can be a bit naff. Not always, but do you know what I mean? It's a little bit tainted. But if you're in there and you kind of, you want to say something, you want to do something, and nobody can hear you, you feel like a ghost. So I'm really interested in putting interactivity in there, however subtle, however slight, because it will give you engagement. Or make it part of the game that you're a ghost. You know, give it a reason that you can't speak or do anything. But I do think that that's something that we need to think about. I think you need some sense of influence over the world, however small. So I'm going to start with some closing thoughts now, which are, first one is, look outside traditional games. You know, traditional games are great, they're wonderful, they're amazing, but let's look outside them, look at other experiences that have been out there, because I think that there's a lot we can learn, you know, and we don't need, with VR, we can start again. We don't need to port all these things that we're used to. There's going to be totally new, exciting places to be. All these non-traditional games that we worked on and things like 3D TV are stepping stones to VR. This is my press answer, but it's true. You know, making Wonderbook, which used a fairly low-end camera, was based in like, it was more of a children's game. Actually, all that was great learning for doing great VR, and it was a stepping stone to doing it. 3D TV, a load of people say to me, oh, you know, VR, isn't it just like 3D TV? I think 3D TV is a stepping stone to VR, and I think in 20 years that's how it will be seen. I think at the moment, because we don't have the syntax and the grammar and the understanding around what works and what doesn't in VR, not fully, doing one thing really, really well is the best way to go. You know, if you look at something like Land's End by Us2, it's a great, simple game. They do it really, really well. London Heist works because the team just spent so much time getting the hands to work right. You know, just do one thing really, really well, and it really works in VR. And this is my kind of thing, forget about VR. To me, that's the most important thing. I don't want anyone going into an experience saying, wow, this VR is amazing. I want them saying, oh my God, I'm going to die. Because I want them to believe that they're actually there. I don't want them to be looking at the tech of it. I want them to be, you know, their mind thinking that they're there. And when we were demoing London Heist, one of the levels ends and you're in front of a desk. and you've been having a shootout, finding a diamond, all these things. What a lot of people did was they put the Move controllers on the desk. Now, the Move controllers are real, and the desk isn't real. Right? They'd only been in there 5 minutes, but they'd forgotten. And so for me, that was like they forgot they were in VR, they thought they were in this other place, and they were really enjoying it. So that's the end of my talk. If anybody's got any questions.
Hi, I have a two-part question. First part of the question is, did you tell your mother that there were going to be sharks in the sea?
She had seen it. I actually took her sister last month and she did it. So the two of them have been through it now. But yeah, she knew that that's what it was, and she genuinely rang me up and said, can I actually come in and have a go at that? And she's never done that with any game I've made before.
Okay. Second part of this question is, what responsibility do we have to our players to inform them about what they're going to experience?
Well, I think that's the same as with any media. You know, you need to, I mean, like we have age ratings. Interestingly, when we took the shark to Gamescom, they rated it as a 12 on screen and a 16 in the headset. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see how the ratings bodies manage that. But I think we do that like we do with any content, really.
Hi. So, thank you for the talk. It really made me think about, narrative elements and what you can do in VR to make people get immersed in the experience. So, something I have noticed with video games, I'm sure this is really obvious to everybody, is that narrative games are great for Let's Play series on, say YouTube, where people who don't necessarily play the game are able to kind of get this vicarious experience of the game. And so I wanted to know, what are your thoughts, if you have any, about VR translating to a medium like that, and players who don't necessarily have access to the game being able to relate to the experience, or will that even be possible, do you think, with VR?
I think it will be possible, and I mean, YouTube have got 360 video as well now, so maybe at some point people will be outputting as 360 video, but that probably will take the dev teams some work to do that, and it can be quite a challenge. So we could get to that point. I'm pretty sure PewDiePie and those guys are going to have something to say that will be quite It's similar to watching the video of my mum. We didn't have to watch it in VR to get the fact that she was having such a great time. So I think, that it'll be a mix of those two, but I would love to see, I suspect that we'll get game trailers in 360 and things like that, so I'm hoping that we'll actually be able to experience them like that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, hi. Hi. Really good talk. Really make me think right now. So, do you have any comments about, let's say if you want to take an existing IP or product or game, turn that into VR? Of course, you don't want to repeat the same thing. You just don't want to port it over, but turn it into a VR experience. Do you think it's conducive? It's not? Or players don't really like to see it that way because they're used to seeing it in a certain format?
No, I think it's an interesting question, and if you look at where we think the market will be to start with, it's probably unrealistic to take an existing game and make the same story, let's say, in VR, because it might cost you 10, 20 million to make, and that might not be the right P&L for a VR game. So the best answer to this really is, if you look at what movies are doing, they're doing like a little experience around the IP. So Game of Thrones, which isn't a movie, it's TV, but they did an experience of going to the wall, right? So it wasn't like a whole story, it was just like a tiny little bit from that IP. Or the Martian, they're called The Third Floor, who did a lot of visual effects for them. They then made a VR experience where you could drive around on Mars rover thing. So I think that's the answer at this stage, is to look at the IP and say, well, what would be cool from this in VR, and make a smaller experience like that, and then put that out and see what happens. Because you can probably make something that fits the P&L.
Right. Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, I think that's it. So, yeah, thank you very much.